something just snapped in Diddy's world, and this time, he can't spin it, bury it, or buy his way around it. Because the $100 million lawsuit he was banking on, the one he thought would restore his image, refill his pockets, and impress the people he's trying to win back, has taken a turn so disastrous even his team didn't see it coming. NBC just hit him with a legal move that quietly destroys his entire strategy, and they did it using his own words from court. So today we're breaking down how Diddy's master plan fell apart, why this ruling could blow up everything he's been building behind bars, and what this means for his future, both legally and financially. Before we get into it, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. Every like and comment pushes Fame Insight further, and trust me, this story is only getting messier. From the moment Diddy walked out of that courtroom, after beating the RICO case, there was one narrative his camp pushed harder than anything else. I'm going to rebuild everything they tried to take from me. And the centerpiece of that comeback fantasy was the $100 million defamation lawsuit against NBC. This wasn't just another legal filing. This was supposed to be the great reset button, a way to reclaim power, rewrite headlines, and refill the bank account that's been bleeding dry since the raids. Behind the scenes, people close to him said he viewed this lawsuit as his get-back money, a financial lifeline that would not only cover the mountain of legal fees he owes, but also help him finance the next phase of his public defense. To him, NBC wasn't a media company. They were the biggest domino. Push that one over, and every other outlet, blogger, documentary team, and accuser would fall in line. But here's the irony. The lawsuit Diddy believed would rebuild his legacy ended up exposing the cracks in it, because once NBC fired back, it became clear Diddy was stepping into a fight he didn't have the leverage, the influence, or the public sympathy to win. And this is where the unraveling really begins. Once NBC filed its response, the tone of the entire lawsuit shifted. What Diddy expected to be a clean power move suddenly turned into a legal autopsy, and NBC brought the scalpel. Instead of engaging in a dramatic back and forth, or hiding behind corporate PR language, NBC went straight for the pressure point, Diddy's own words. They didn't have to speculate. They didn't need anonymous sources, hidden files, or dramatic reenactments. All they had to do was quote Diddy from the courtroom. NBC highlighted his admission, the one moment where he said, in front of the judge and the world, that his fall was the result of his own choices, not a documentary. And in that single move, they reframed the entire case. How can a network be blamed for destroying your reputation when you already admitted you destroyed it yourself? That argument hit harder than any headline ever could. Because now, the burden wasn't on NBC to prove their documentary was accurate. The burden shifted back onto Diddy to explain why his own confession doesn't contradict his entire lawsuit. And here's the part that rattled his legal team the most. NBC wasn't attacking out of malice. They were attacking with receipts, timing, and the calm precision of a company that's been sued by public figures before, and wins more often than it loses. This wasn't emotional. This wasn't personal. This was corporate self-defense, and they executed it flawlessly. And as soon as that filing hit the docket, every media outlet, PR office, and industry lawyer watching this case had the same reaction: oh, he's not winning this one. But the deeper issue wasn't the filing itself. It was what this filing signaled about Diddy's position. A man who once controlled narratives with a phone call was now losing them in public because his own testimony became Exhibit A against him. And the fallout from that moment? That's where everything spirals. The moment NBC pushed back, the cracks in Diddy's entire legal strategy became impossible to ignore. Because this lawsuit wasn't just a lawsuit, it was supposed to be his lifeline. Behind the scenes, the plan looked something like this: win the $100 million claim, replenish the cash he burned through during trial, and use that momentum to launch a series of lawsuits against networks, producers, bloggers, and anyone else he believed contributed to his downfall. The idea wasn't simply to win money, it was to rebuild control. But NBC's response exposed something Diddy has been trying to hide for months. He is fighting on too many fronts with too little leverage. He has an appeal approaching, mounting legal fees, limited cash flow, shrinking influence outside prison, and now a corporate giant turning his own courtroom words into a shield. And once one domino leans, the entire formation becomes unstable. NBC's filing didn't just weaken this lawsuit, it destabilized the strategy behind it. Because if the biggest target refuses to fold, what does that mean for the smaller ones? Production companies? Streaming platforms? Independent creators? Journalists? If NBC stands firm, they will too. And that means Diddy's opportunity to regain financial ground shrinks by the day. This is the part his team didn't account for. Corporations don't fear individuals, they fear precedent. And the precedent of settling with Diddy would signal that networks can't report, document, or analyze powerful people without risking a massive payout. NBC chose to make an example of him, and in doing so, they highlighted something Diddy has never been forced to confront. When the power shifts, influence stops being a shield and becomes evidence. And as that reality closes in, Diddy's legal team is scrambling, because their strongest argument is now the very thing NBC is using to dismantle the case. But the real turning point comes next, when the courts step in. If Section 3 exposed the cracks in Diddy's strategy, Section 4 reveals the moment everything shifted, not because of NBC's argument, but because the court itself held up the mirror. This is where things become almost poetic. NBC didn't need to invent anything. They didn't rely on speculation, anonymous sources, or dramatic narration. They simply pointed to the one thing a judge cannot ignore: Diddy's own sworn statement. During his trial, Diddy told the court in plain language that his choices cost him everything: his freedom, his career, his public reputation. And once those words were recorded, they became permanent, not emotional, not performative, not dramatic, just legally undeniable. So when NBC responded to his $100 million claim by saying, "Your Honor, he already admitted the damage came from himself, not us," the courtroom shifted instantly, because defamation requires one key ingredient: harm caused by the defendant. But Diddy's statement effectively pulled that ingredient out of the recipe. It wasn't anger, it wasn't humiliation, it wasn't the documentary. The harm came from him, and the court knows that. This changes everything, because the lawsuit wasn't designed simply to punish NBC. It was designed to fund the rest of Diddy's legal comeback. It was the opening chapter in a long chain of dominoes. But once his own testimony becomes Exhibit A against him, the dominoes stop. This is the moment his legal team now fears most: the judge citing Diddy's words in their ruling. It would be the cleanest, simplest way to dismiss the case. And if that happens, the ripple effect extends far beyond this lawsuit. Every other media company Diddy planned to pursue will take it as confirmation. The court doesn't buy the narrative, and once the court stops buying it, nobody else will either. But the most damaging consequence? It destroys the illusion of control, the one thing Diddy has been desperately trying to protect inside Fort Dix. And as that facade cracks, we move into the next turning point, where things inside the prison take a new and unexpected shift. While the court focuses on legal arguments, another reality has been quietly growing in the background, one that Diddy cannot escape, no matter how loudly he performs confidence. The truth is simple: he is running out of liquid money, and the people who once stood ready to lend or invest now keep their distance. Not because they no longer like him, but because associating with him requires putting their names on official documents, financial disclosures, and federal records. And no one with status is willing to walk into that fire with him. For years, Diddy's power came from the illusion that the money would never run out. Homes, jets, cars, he had all the symbols of wealth. But symbols don't pay legal fees. Lawyers don't accept assets as payment. And the type of attorneys he hired, the type who flood a courtroom with a 9-person team, expect immediate wire transfers, consistent ones, large ones. And this is where the pressure behind the $100 million lawsuit becomes clearer. It wasn't just a grudge. It wasn't pride. It was survival. This lawsuit was supposed to be the financial reset button, the check that replenishes the accounts, pays the legal legions, and keeps the machine functioning long enough to pursue every other target on his list. Without that win, the strategy collapses. Without that cash, the legal war becomes much harder to sustain. But the problem runs deeper. His friends, executives, and industry allies are refusing to step in, not out of betrayal, but because federal investigations turn every loan into a breadcrumb that agents will follow. Anyone offering him money is effectively volunteering to become part of the case file. And in Hollywood and the music industry, reputations matter more than loyalty. Diddy knows this. He built a career on it. The irony is painful. The man who once bragged about abundance is now cornered by scarcity. Not scarcity of talent or fame, scarcity of the one thing he needs most: unquestioned financial backing. And as those doors quietly close, the lawsuit against NBC transforms from a legal battle into a lifeline. But with the network's pushback gaining momentum, that lifeline is fraying faster than he wants anyone to notice. What makes this moment so pivotal is the realization creeping into his inner circle. If this lawsuit falls apart, it doesn't just mark a courtroom loss. It signals that the era of unlimited resources is officially over. And when a man built on excess is forced to face limits, the cracks in the empire become impossible to hide. And those cracks are exactly what lead us into the next stage of this unraveling. The turning point didn't arrive with a dramatic courtroom outburst or a headline-grabbing leak. It came quietly, in the form of a meticulously written response from NBC's legal team. A response so sharp, so strategically devastating, that it shifted the entire momentum of Diddy's $100 million lawsuit in a single blow. Because instead of arguing technicalities or dancing around accusations, NBC did something far more lethal. They used Diddy's own words against him. In their filing, they pointed directly to the statement he made during the criminal trial, a moment where he admitted that his own actions, his own decisions, were the cause of his downfall. Those admissions weren't whispered, they weren't hypothetical. They were recorded, presented, and entered into the official record. And that is what made NBC's move so effective. They didn't have to prove he damaged his reputation. He already said it, in court, under pressure, before anyone even mentioned documentaries or media takedowns. For Diddy, this was the nightmare scenario. The entire lawsuit depended on convincing a judge that NBC's film shattered his career. But when the defendant can point to the plaintiff admitting the damage was self-inflicted, the foundation collapses. Every argument becomes thinner, every strategy becomes weaker. Suddenly, the lawsuit that was meant to restore financial strength turns into a mirror, one that reflects inconvenient truths he hoped the court would overlook. And here's where the shift becomes even more dangerous for him. NBC isn't just defending itself, it's signaling to every other network, publication, and media company on his target list. If this case falls apart, his entire plan to sue his way back into solvency unravels. Because you only get to intimidate a room if people believe you can win. Once you lose that aura, the fear evaporates, the leverage disappears. Behind the scenes, legal analysts are already whispering that this case may be the beginning of a chain reaction. If NBC prevails, and the likelihood grows by the day, it sets a precedent. It tells the industry that pushing back is not only possible, but winnable. What started as one lawsuit meant to recover money may instead become the moment every other defendant chooses to stand tall. For someone who built an empire on control, on power, on perception, this is a different kind of loss. Not public, but structural. Not loud, but deeply damaging. And what makes it even more surreal is that the most devastating evidence wasn't dredged up by investigators, dramatized by filmmakers, or uncovered by tabloids. It came from his own mouth, at a time he thought he still had the upper hand. This is where the stakes shift. Because if NBC can turn his confession into a shield, imagine what the rest of the industry will do with it. What makes this moment even more revealing isn't just NBC's refusal to fold, it's what that refusal exposes about the strategy Diddy was quietly trying to construct behind the scenes. Because that $100 million lawsuit wasn't just about reputation. It wasn't even primarily about revenge. According to insiders close to the situation, this case was supposed to be the financial engine behind everything else he planned to do once the trial ended. From the beginning, Diddy structured this lawsuit as the linchpin in a larger recovery plan. His legal bills had drained him. His projects froze. His assets were tied up, scrutinized, or outright inaccessible. And his inner circle, the same people he had relied on for decades, began distancing themselves the moment the trial hit national broadcasts. In other words, he was running out of fuel quickly. Winning $100 million from a major network would have instantly changed that. It would have given him the liquidity to continue funding an appeal, to pursue additional lawsuits, and to position himself for a political favor, the very same pardon he's been bragging about inside Fort Dix. That lawsuit wasn't just a complaint, it was a life raft disguised as a legal filing. But here's the problem for him. Everything in that plan required the NBC suit to look strong, or at the very least viable. If NBC had hesitated, settled, or even entertained early negotiations, it would have sent a signal that his legal pressure still carried weight. Instead, they responded with a confidence that undermined his entire posture. They didn't blink. They didn't stall. They didn't seem remotely intimidated by the 9-lawyer powerhouse he assembled. And that changes the dynamic entirely. Because when a company of NBC's size, with its own teams of elite attorneys, investigators, and internal protections, looks at your lawsuit and essentially says, "We're not worried. Everyone else on your list pays attention," it weakens the narrative that he still has the influence to steamroll his critics. It highlights the difference between the threat he once posed and the threat he poses now. Most importantly, it disrupts the illusion he was trying to maintain behind bars. The idea that he still has a financial empire waiting for him, untouched and ready for resurrection. If this lawsuit collapses, that illusion collapses with it. And no amount of jail yard pep talks or just wait till next year promises can patch the hole that leaves. In other words, NBC didn't just challenge his claims, they challenged the identity he's fighting desperately to keep alive. What happens next, inside the courtroom and inside Fort Dix, is about to get even more intense. What NBC did next is what truly shifted the ground beneath Diddy's legal strategy. Instead of relying on technicalities or procedural defenses, their attorneys went straight to the heart of the matter and used Diddy's own courtroom testimony as the foundation of their argument. In the world of litigation, this is a rare, almost surgical move. NBC didn't need to spend pages arguing the accuracy of their reporting. They didn't need to pull eyewitness accounts or forensic analysis. They didn't even need to put the documentary under a microscope. Instead, they simply quoted Diddy back to himself, and that is where the entire case began to collapse. Because the moment he admitted, under oath, that his fall from grace was a direct result of his own decisions, NBC didn't have to prove reputational damage came from anywhere else. He had already done that work for them. What NBC essentially argued was this: if the man at the center of the scandal acknowledges that he destroyed his own career, how can any media platform be held responsible for reporting on what the world already saw? It was a devastating legal angle, not dramatic, not emotional, but quietly lethal. But here's the deeper issue for Diddy. This wasn't just a tactical defeat. It exposed a truth he's been trying to outrun since the day those courtroom doors opened. For decades, he's been able to rewrite narratives, spin stories, and reshape public perception. Yet in this case, the narrative didn't come from a documentary. It didn't come from a journalist. It didn't come from a disgruntled former employee. It came from him. And once a statement like that enters the legal record, it becomes part of the permanent architecture of the case. There's no reversing it. No PR memo can soften it. No power move can bury it. NBC seized that single sentence, the one moment he broke from the performance and spoke plainly about the consequences of his own behavior, and turned it into a shield strong enough to shut down a $100 million lawsuit. Worse, it sends a signal to every other entity on his target list, networks, journalists, bloggers, publishers, that they don't have to fear retaliation. They can stand their ground, because the strongest piece of evidence in their defense is Diddy himself, and that makes the mountain he was planning to climb even steeper. The irony is almost cinematic. The one man who built a career on controlling the narrative is now being undone by his own words, spoken in a courtroom he thought he'd walk out of with a clean slate. What comes next isn't just another chapter. It's the unraveling of a strategy he believed would save him. What makes this lawsuit's collapse even more devastating for Diddy is that the stakes were never just about clearing his name. Behind the polished language and dramatic press releases, this case represented something far more urgent: cash flow. Because for all of Diddy's assets, the homes, the cars, the jets, the catalog, liquid money is what fuels a legal war. And over the last year, his legal fees have been burning through his reserves at a pace that even an empire can't comfortably sustain. The 9-lawyer defense team, the crisis managers, the appeals experts, the investigators, none of that comes cheap. Every filing, every motion, every hearing is another invoice waiting at the door. And according to multiple insiders, the lawsuit against NBC wasn't just about vengeance or strategy. It was, in many ways, a lifeline. $100 million payout would have instantly reshaped his legal landscape. It would have covered his current defense, funded his appeals, and given him room to pursue the aggressive sue them all campaign he publicly hinted at. It would have restored leverage, the one thing that seems to be slipping through his fingers faster than anything else. But the moment NBC dismantled his claim using his own admission, the financial dominoes began to tilt. Because now other major media outlets, the very ones he hoped to sue next, know he doesn't have the legal footing to go after them. Instead of preparing for multi-million-dollar settlements, they can take the opposite position, stand their ground, wait for discovery, and let Diddy's own statements do the heavy lifting. And if these companies no longer fear his legal threats, his ability to intimidate or silence critics evaporates with them. This is the part that truly shifts Diddy's reality. A weakened lawsuit doesn't just mean a missed payout, it signals vulnerability. The kind of vulnerability corporations recognize immediately. And once these entities sense a plaintiff who is outmatched, outfunded, and running out of options, they don't negotiate. They don't settle. They widen the gap and wait for the pressure to crush whatever's left. And that creates a new problem for Diddy. If he cannot win this lawsuit, and he cannot threaten the next, he loses one of the last tools he had left to reshape his public image. In a world where reputation equals opportunity, and opportunity equals survival, that loss is more severe than any headline will ever capture. Because without this payout, the appeals get harder, the legal options get narrower, and the future he envisioned, the one where he emerges from prison ready to reclaim his place, begins to feel farther away than ever. The collapse of Diddy's NBC lawsuit isn't happening in isolation, it's triggering a chain reaction that touches every corner of his legal and financial reality. Because when a lawsuit this large begins to fail, it does more than dent confidence, it signals weakness. And in the world Diddy once dominated, weakness invites pressure from every direction. Suddenly, the other corporations he planned to sue, from streaming platforms to studios to news networks, don't have to brace themselves for multi-million-dollar legal battles. They don't have to negotiate, settle, or even entertain his threats. Instead, they can sit back and watch as one dismissed claim becomes evidence against the next. And as each outlet realizes that Diddy's arguments can be dismantled with a single transcript from his own trial, the more emboldened they become. This shift also affects his appeal. Because judges pay attention to patterns, momentum, and credibility. A collapsing lawsuit makes his appeals narrative harder to maintain. If he's arguing that the media destroyed his life, but the media can prove he admitted to destroying it himself, it undercuts the emotional foundation of his defense. It strips away sympathy, it narrows the path forward, and then there's the financial ripple. A loss this size forces every lawyer on his team to reconsider timelines, strategies, and retainer agreements. Legal firms don't operate on loyalty, they operate on funding. When the potential for a giant recovery evaporates, billable hours become heavier, deadlines become stricter, and patience becomes limited. A defense this expensive can only stand its ground for so long before financial gravity pulls it downward. Inside prison, the impact is different, but equally damaging. Inmates talk, staff listen, news travels. When the man who promised everyone he'd walk out of Fort Dix on a presidential pardon suddenly takes a major legal hit, it changes how people perceive him. The myth shrinks, the aura fades, the swagger becomes harder to maintain. And in a place where perception dictates safety, influence, and alliances, that shift matters more than anything he files in court. And this is where the stakes rise, because if this lawsuit collapses completely, and every sign suggests it will, Diddy loses far more than $100 million. He loses the illusion of control, the fear he once commanded, the advantage he believed he still had, and the fallback plan he counted on to rebuild everything after prison. For the first time, the world outside the prison walls isn't bending. It's pushing back, and the cracks in his empire are no longer hairline fractures. They're the beginning of a structural collapse. Behind the legal filings, behind the press releases, behind the posturing inside Fort Dix, there's a quieter story unfolding, one Diddy can't spin, can't hide, and can't use money to outrun. It's the story of a man realizing that the version of himself he's been clinging to is slipping away faster than he can hold it together. Because once that lawsuit began falling apart, insiders say Diddy's mood shifted. The confidence he projected, the "I'll be back on top soon" act, has started to show cracks. The same bravado he uses to impress inmates doesn't carry the same weight when the news he receives from the outside keeps contradicting the fantasy he's trying to sell. There's an unspoken truth in prison that every inmate eventually feels. Your outside world shrinks while the consequences grow louder. And for Diddy, that shrinking world is hitting him harder than people realize. Every financial setback pulls him deeper into a hole. Every failed legal maneuver tightens the walls around him. Every contradiction between what he says and what is proven in court erodes the authority he tries to maintain inside Fort Dix. Even the people around him, the same ones he's promising a big comeback, are starting to sense the disconnect. They hear the rumors, they see the headlines, and they notice when he stops talking as loud on certain days. This erosion of confidence is dangerous, not because it weakens him legally, but because it threatens the identity he's built his entire life around. Diddy has always survived by projecting power, whether through wealth, influence, or intimidation. But prison strips all three away. And when the outside world stops validating the myth collapses from within. Each failed legal tactic chips away at the core narrative he's depended on, that he is untouchable, unstoppable, indispensable. But the world is no longer responding to him with fear or fascination. It's responding with receipts, with consequences, and with accountability. And that's why this moment is so pivotal. Because once a man built on image starts losing control of the image, the unraveling becomes personal. It's not about money, it's not about fame, it's about identity. And the version of Diddy trying to survive inside Fort Dix is slowly being cornered by the reality he can no longer outtalk, outspend, or outrun. This time, the downfall isn't coming from enemies, it's coming from the truth he can't cover up anymore. At this point, one thing has become undeniable. Diddy is no longer fighting the media, the bloggers, or the networks. He's fighting the consequences of his own admissions. NBC didn't have to twist the narrative, exaggerate claims, or manufacture scandal. All they had to do was play back his own words, the exact moment he told the court that his reputation was destroyed because of his decisions, not theirs. And that single admission is now the fracture line running through his entire $100 million lawsuit. What makes this moment even more striking is how symbolic it is of the larger collapse. For decades, Diddy operated as a man who believed he couldn't be checked. He believed influence outweighed accountability. He believed intimidation could silence truth. But inside a federal courtroom, none of that mattered. The image, the legacy, the mythology, all of it evaporated the moment he acknowledged responsibility for the downfall he's now trying to blame on everyone else. And that's why this lawsuit matters far beyond the money. Because once NBC knocks this down, every other lawsuit, every planned retaliation, every attempt to recover cash or rebuild power becomes that much weaker. It sets a precedent that no PR spin can undo. And as this plays out, one truth is becoming clearer by the day. The world Diddy used to control is gone, and no amount of legal muscle can bring it back. Now, before we wrap up, I want to hear from you. Do you think this lawsuit is officially dead in the water? Or do you believe Diddy still has one last move left before this house of cards finally collapses? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. If you want more deep dive breakdowns like this one, make sure you subscribe. Your support is what keeps Fame Insight going and allows us to cover the stories that big platforms won't touch. Like, comment, subscribe, and stay tapped in. This saga is far from over, and you'll want to be here when the next chapter drops. Fame Insight, where the whispers get loud.